digital representations in digital environments that are related to tourism. And she's also an expert on a particular field, which is a digital dating. That is, all those applications that are common both in the West, think about Tinder, and in the East, I think the most common one in China is Temtem, that allow people, especially young people, but not only young people, to meet virtually. And this particular sphere of activity, digital activity, is also changing enormously due to the pandemic. So we're actually very curious to listen to Professor SORO, who's a scholar who's constantly studying the contemporary evolution of society, which is a very difficult task. The digital sphere evolves in a very rapid way, and one must be extremely attentive to the changes. So it is really with immense pleasure that I introduce this friend of ours, this friend of Shanghai University, and I give her the floor from now up to 10:40, when we'll have our first break, and then we'll resume for questions on the lecture and in general on the course, which is going to end today. So, Professor Elsa SORO, it's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you a lot, Massimo. It's a very great pleasure to be with you and with all Shanghai students and staff today. I'm really, really honored to, finalize these beautiful seminars. I'm just gonna share my screen for show the presentation. Hopefully everything is gonna be all right. Okay. Yes, thanks a lot, Massimo, for your very generous presentation of mine. Yes, I'm so happy to develop my research within Facets, a research group that's really fostered and boosts my research interest, which as you told already, was basically this try to understand the evolving digital sphere, and in particular by focus on places where people and places also represent themselves. So today I will devote my talk to the topic of tourism, and in particular how in the contemporary digital sphere tourism meets face. We'll see how in which sense we can really establish a relationship between new or contemporary tourism practice and the topic of the digital phase, which is the core, which is the bottom line of our research. So I'll start. Okay. Well, Professor Leon, as you could listen at, has already generously introduced me. As a remark, I already had tourism and also urban space as a subject of my PhD thesis that was supervised by Professor Leone some years ago, where I tried to figure out how cities represent themselves in new digital platform. That's a lot of time in terms of media and digital revolution pass from that point. But still, the topic of space and tourism interested not just my academic career, but also I've been luckily working in a European program which is called European Capital of Culture, where I and I worked as a consultant for some cities in Europe that wanted to be the European capital of culture and try to resignify themselves towards this goal. So this give me lots of material, practical material in terms of study how cities want to promote themselves in, of course, within an European framework. So I'm very interested to, also to listen to our Chinese student comments on that, because it would be very interesting, to kind of compare Western and Eastern way of place valorization. And also, as Professor Leone already mentioned it, I am being lecturing in a school of tourism in Barcelona, and I've been part of the research group that try to understand how new form, a new way of doing tourism has been evolving in the digital realm. So that's a topic that really interested. That's really is a core of my research, and also in some way daily practice. Also, let me say, as Professor Leone already mentioned, that it's particularly matter to me these days. Devote a talk to the topic of tourism in a moment when the industry, such industry, have been so profoundly beaten by the coronavirus crisis. So it's a very moment when we are really called to figure out new way of creating new tourism representation, and we are all called to that. And I really think that semiotician are very good tool for doing this. So I really invite our student also to consider this as a topic of their future research, because we really need you. I mean, the tourism industry really need new and talented minds. Okay, and also needless to say, then I'm particularly honored to talk about the topic of tourism to our kind student, Chinese student, in a moment when China, at least before this, the crisis, was one of the top leader of tourism industry in a global landscape. So with just some figure that really show how big was China, both in inbound tourism that outbound tourism. And this is also a matter of the big work of valorization of splendid China's landscape, both natural and human. In fact, of course, China is as you know, is a large number of world cultural and natural heritage sites recognized by UNESCO. So I'm very flattered to talk to people that come from such a big player in this industry. And of course, I really can't forget the beauty of the country that I had the opportunity to visit last July. So I really hope to. I'm really looking forward to come back when it will be possible again. So, okay, having said that, let's now focus on the specific topic of my talk. So before discussing directly semiotic of tourism and therefore the role of digital phase in contemporary tourism practice, the presentation will intend to frame place valorization in a more general semiotics of place, has been terrorized mostly by generative semiotics with the figure of Greimas, that's I'm sure you have already heard from my colleagues, and by semiotics of culture. After such introduction about what is a semiotics of place, space will be focused as a text that is interested by different meaning transformation. And especially this consideration apply to tourism spaces, to the space of tourism, which haven't defined so once in a prioristic way. Instead, tourism places are the result of a variety of valorization processes within speak cultural and social context. Then the talk will focus on a new digital scenario that probably you students are more expert than us, because you are probably always been lived in such realm. So it would be very helpful to hear your opinion about the age we are living in. Anyway, so the presentation will focus on these new digital scenario, which has contributed for sure, among other things, to change and redefine tourism representations. We'll see how such meaningful changes have, curiously, the phase and in particular the digital phases as a signifier and a catalyst of such change of gaze. In particular, the practice of selfie that I'm sure you're very familiar with, far from being just a temporary trend, it will be examined as a signifier of a shift in the visual perspective on place, from the gaze to the place to the gaze to the face. This is what selfie operate. This is the selfie operation, a change of gaze. Okay, so it goes without saying that such a shift also have a very relevant role in destination promotion and marketing discourses, as we'll see. So basically, roughly, these will be the contents of my talk today. So let's start with trying to comprehend these semiotics, these specific semiotics of place. Well, within the generative trajectory of the signification, as theorized by Grimas, a very important scholar who creates, among other things, also the narrative theory, and I'm sure that my colleagues have already introduced it in a very detailed way. Anyway, plays in such trajectory of the signification is one pole in the organization of the discursive syntax. Okay, so space within this theory has been interpreted as an axe at the discursive level, together with times and actors. Okay, just a rough review of this very complex theory. Well, the same Greimas devoted a text of him included in the book Semiotics and Social Science about a proper semiotics of space. And here we can find a definition of what it intended as semiotics of space. Okay, so by quoting, if it's true, Greimas said, if it's true that all knowledge on the board begins with projecting the discontinuous on the continuous, we can perhaps provisionally once more taken up the age-old opposition, expanse versus space. So space is something that's organized, something that is continuous, something that is the extentiveness. And then later in the quote, Greimas said, this junction can be either indefined and appear as here versus elsewhere. This second sentence is particularly interested for the further study of tourism. Tourism is also included, can be also defined by using this opposition. The here, the space of today, the space where we go to university, the space of work, versus a space of elsewhere, a space where we hopefully will go for holiday soon, or we used to go. Okay, so a space of otherness that is different from the space of our daily life. As we can infer from this quote, space starts where from the extensiveness and from a continuous. This distinction, so in that way, is interesting to create a relationship between the definition offered by Greimas of what the space is, something that is that's organized, continuous, with to put this theory in relationship with the theory of semiosphere, which has been elaborated by the School of Tartu and Moscow some days ago. I'm sure you really enjoy my colleague Remo Gramigna lecture that he has the opportunity to study in such prestigious schools. So probably he explained to you from a very first place, from the very front line, the theory of the semiotic of culture. Just for me, it's important to remark that within the semiotics reflection on space, it's important to remark that the definition of this semiosphere, the main dispositive for understanding culture and the meaning, that the School of Tartu and Moscow elaborated. So the same definition of the semiosphere is a spatial definition, because semiosphere, according to Lotman, the guy in the picture, the main scholar within this School of Tartu and Moscow, that's probably you already know. Okay, so Lotman theorized that the semiotic space, that the semiosphere is a semiotic space necessary for existence and functioning of languages. It's a space again, which is prior, existent, and is a constant interaction with languages. So furthermore, both we can consider both in Greimas and in Lotman theory, space can be analyzed as something which is limited against the continuous, something that is limited by borders. And borders are very important dispositive in the semiosphere dispositive within the semiotics of culture theory. Because border, according to Lotman definition, are bilingual. The border is a bilingual mechanism which translates external communication into internal language of the semiosphere, and of course vice versa. Thus, only with the help of boundary, the semiosphere is able to establish a contact with the no-semiotics or extra-semiotic space. This is again a very complex definition that uses thought a geographical metaphor, the space with a border. So, if we use such dispositive for reading and for interpreting, for example, the meaning mechanism which operates in a city, it's very easy to see how the border of the city are not given in a prioristic way, because the city is an evolving mechanism which involve and which is include in it new territories, which from extra space become part of the city itself. Okay, this is like there are lots of study by geographers, but also by semioticians about the process of becoming center, like maybe a neighbor who used to be peripheral. Progressively has been included by different meaning operation in the center of the city, especially if cities as they do, they continuously evolve and become bigger and bigger. And of course, our Chinese students are witness here, maybe more than us European. Where our city are relatively little in comparison with yours. Okay, so it's not by chance that I already mentioned the urban space because recent semiotics, a lot of recent semiotics effort in terms of researches and studies have been devoted to the topic of the urban space. You can see in the slide a book that's gathered different contribution in order to define. The title is Sense and the City. Okay, Sense and Metropolis. That strive for a post-urban semiotics, which stand for trying to interpret the new concept of city. Also, in Turin, our prestigious research center, some years ago, an important seminar about that gathered scholars from both national and international about the topic of the city as a text. From this seminar, we had the seminar lead to a very interesting publication edited by Professor Leone himself that is called, in fact, the city as a text, writing and urban writing and rewriting, by focusing on the fact that, again, the city is not already done, is not already finished. The city is continuously rewrite by whom? May also by us, by citizens, who are the user of the city itself. So as you can already gathered, in a semiotic perspective, cities are considered and interpreted as a text that are subject to continuous and manifold rereading, not just rewriting, but also rereading processes. Is a very intricate semiotic mechanism that's within which lots of narrative program, which is basically I have to cross the city for heeding my workplace and have lots of difficulty. I have to take transportation. I have to wait because there is some problem with transportation. I finally get there. So this is like, for example, this is just an example, a very silly example of a narrative program that, that's us. We are the user of the city. We have to face every day. Also, we can say that cities itself as a mechanism permits some behavior and abstract others. In this sense, I really want to mention a very pillar book by this French philosopher, if you want, that is called Michel Desserteaux, that has devoted a book about the practice of everyday life. In such a book, there is a chapter that is called Walking in the City, where Desserteaux expresses his theory about the city as a mechanism that is like created by the authorities, that can be like both private and public bodies, obviously he was studying typical Western city, but I think that it can be useful for overall cities. Okay, so the city is this organism that is created by the authorities, which established rules for how to say, in order in order to say to citizens how to behave within a city. But then the contrast at the citizenship level, the walker, for example, you take the example of a walker of the street that never, not necessarily follow such rules. It gave this very easy but also very bright example of crossing a road by using the grid of the street, or instead by taking a shortcut. Just a simple gesture of taking a shortcut is a gesture of is a tactical gesture, Desserteau said, in terms of rewriting, right, the meaning of the city. So if we take it to a urban planning level, we can say that more and more recently, urban planners are taking into consideration also citizenship opinion on which place they want to live, and try to co-design the planning of the city. From the semiotic point of view, as we are seeing, we really don't have to forget how cities are constantly reshaped by media, language, and other tasks that contribute to redefine the identity of the city. If cities are signs lit, old, the signs of identity, of memories, of consumptions, such as monuments, such as places of consumption, such as malls, for example, sport facilities, they really hold the sign of an identity which is changing all the time. So such premises as the city as a space where identity is continuously redefined, rewrite, a city which literally holds the sign of this transformation, if we switch our attention to tourism and to tourism space, obviously tourism is one of the activities that we can say more explicitly help to give identity to the place. As places that are worth visiting or no longer worth visiting. Okay. So this introduction helped to see how tourism is so interesting for semioticians. In the very beginning of the interest of semiotics towards tourism, this American semiotician Jonathan Culler gave a definition of the semiotics of tourism, which is very easy to understand how the discipline further research more in this topic. So Culler said, all over the world, the unsung armies of semioticians, the tourists, are fanning out in search of signs of Frenchness, of the signs of Italian, and I would say obviously also the sign of Chinese. I mean, when we Western, especially if we are at the first experience by visiting Asian country and in particular China, we are constantly interested in grasping the sign of this other, which is the place we are visiting. So we are really searching for the authentic food, the authentic way Chinese people live, because this is what interests the most the tourists traditionally. Okay, so that's why tourists are naturally semiotician, because there are people that they are searching for the sign all the time, when until as long they are tourists. Okay. So of course, obviously, we have this theory also has been brilliantly theorized by the French semiotician Roland Barthes. In his book Mythologies, he devoted a chapter where he analyzed the Blue Guide. Was a very traditional and very pioneers guided book, tourist guided book. And he was very critical in a time where there was no any criticism against tourism practice. It was very critical, and it was very sharp by understanding how the tourist guides tend to create stereotypes of the place, and also of the people of the place. So kind of feeding the idea that tourists just want to see stereotypes, places and people, and also how the the tourist guides help to create a false myth. Okay. So, therefore, from a semiotics perspective, tourism is first and foremost a form of valorization. Okay, all this operation of searching for the signs of Frenchness is a way of give a new value, or not that new value, to a place, the place we visit. Tourism is a discursive phenomenon in a semiotic framework, based on a variety of tourist-making operations, which, again, are involved in the process of giving value to the place. So the touristicity of a place, again, is not something that exists from the beginning, that exists in a prioristic way, but again, is something that emerged from semiotics processes by, and also is fed by a plethora of textualities, of other textualities. That, for example, if we take movies industry, okay, movies and the movie industry is one of the among others that create a specific value to a place. So you can see here the advertising of a very famous movie by Woody Allen that some years ago basically create a big flow of especially American tourists to Barcelona, because the topic of the movie, aside from the very plot, was the city of Barcelona. So there is also a field of research that is called movie-induced tourism research. That are those researchers who study how movie create tourism flow, help to create, help to induce tourism flows. And then the same processes of touristicity creation also create a new niche of tourism. It's doing some little research. For example, I found that tea tourism is a new sector of tourism in Xinjiang area in the Henan province. Maybe you know more than me in that field, but just for saying that a place that's used not to be tourist can become tourists by the influence, under the influence of a plethora of other textualities, such as movies, such as other discourses that circulated in, as we see, the author, and in particular the digital sphere. So, but now let me introduce the topic of phase finally, and its relevance for contemporary tourism. Let's start with tourism. Let's start to introduce the topic of phase by stating that tourism can be considered as a facial activity. Let's see in which sense, okay? So argolid tourism can be primarily defined as a facial activity. In fact, tourism can be interpreted as a form of gazing at the place, and of course, the gaze is a sense organ of our face, which is not absolutely secondary factor. Okay? So, in this regard, let me mention a very famous publication, a very relevant publication in tourism study, which is the one of the geographer and sociologist, the British geographer and sociologist John Harry, who wrote two books, the Tourist Gaze and a new edition of the book with the young Danish scholar Jonas Larsen, all devoted to terrorize the tourist gaze. Okay, so on its side, this is about the creation through the gaze of a form of objectification of the place and all objectification of the people that are the us. This is what primarily the tourist gaze tend to do. Okay. On its side, semiotics has enriched such a terrorization of the tourist gaze by pointing out how the gaze is made by multiple actors, especially in the new digital scenario, where lots of text are so intermingled. Okay, so if we quote a very interesting observation by Professor Ugo Volli, according to Volli, the touristic valorization are always intertextual in nature. Increasing the significance of a place in the eyes of tourists required to insert them in the intertextual net, made of lots of things, okay, made of caption, guides, book, maps, movies, and obviously in our very, very current scenario, digital texts such as Western and Eastern social media and a plethora of digital platforms such as blogs devoted to travel and not only to travel. So we are really we really find ourselves in an overabundances of textuality about praise, about place, that create a situation where our gaze is a sort of, is like cross-eyed. We're always looking at our phone at the same time. We're looking at the place, we're looking at our social media or social or digital platform where there are information to the place. So this gaze, our gaze, is not given up in a prioristic way. It's changing all the time, and this creates this has a big impact in the place promotion. Is not surprisingly, the advent of the digitalization and radically transformed the traditional role of producer and consumers of the place. Whereas the traditional producer of the tourism discourse, which used to be what are called the DM the Destination Marketing Organization, is now replaced by a plethora of other places that create new representation of a place. And in such scenario, the tourist pass from being just a consumer of the place, the consumer of place representation, better said, to a producer of such representations. So if we take into account the tourist cycle experience, which is the tourist cycle experience, is like the experience that goes before the trip, during the trip, and after the trip. So if we look at such experience by using the gray mass canonical narrative scheme, we see how each step of this cycle have been profoundly affected by the plethora of new digital textualities. In the phase of the qualification of the subject according to Greimas category, which is before the traveling, the tourist nowadays is influenced by what basically they see online. So here, probably you're more familiar than me, is a Chinese social network which also launched a good-looking social travel app for which is basically, and you correct me if I'm wrong, a travel diary where other users describe their experience of the place. So in this phase, that's Greimas called the qualification of the subject is, you can say, overqualified by the plethora of suggestions that come from other users that suggest him not to go to this place, but go to this place. So this really changed the tourism experience as a whole. So if we go to the phase of the trip itself, which is called, if we use Greimas scheme, is called the performance stage, the visitor are, with their mobile technology, are enabled to share real-time their experience of the place by posting picture on their different social platforms according to their current taste. And so do others. So they are really immersed in a very intermingled representation, real-time representation of place. And if we go to the last phase of the tourist cycle, which is after the trip, the phase that in Greimas term can be defined as the sanction phase, okay? The tour will be evaluated, is evaluated, both by social media followers of the tourists with reaction, comments, and also this also fit the official representations of the place. Also, we can also add to this very complex mechanism that 1 hour after what is called the networked traveled. Networked traveled is basically when we travel, we are immersed in a networked environment. Okay, so one of the effects of this new what is called from scholar from tourist study a network traveled scenario. This enables tourists to be at 2 or more places at once. They made a connection with us, distant others through our social media, really change the experience of the place, which is no longer unless we have really we go to very remote place of the hearth. But unless this, we are really able to be on the tour in the tourist place and be also home with our distant others. Okay, so we are more immersed in such a network. We can't really live unless as I was saying, for very remote places. So, of course, the consequence, as I already mentioned, is that tourism marketing discourse appears to be distributed among the different players or stakeholders, if you want, that contribute to such representations of the place. And also, as a consequence, we can say that the tourism experience appears to be co-created. So how this multiplication of voices is thematized by the digital phase? And now I'm really going to the core of the talk. In the following, let's examine how the phase thematized the new scenario of tourism representation, the new tourism representation. We are talking about a practice, which is the practice of selfie, that, of course, you are more than familiar with. So, just to focus on how, the popularity derived from the increase of the smartphone, of course, and mostly from the adoption of the front-facing camera. Okay, this was a big innovation, even if nowadays we take it for granted. And the introduction of this reversible front-facing screen allow users to see themselves as they are taking a picture on themselves was a crucial design innovation that also together with the possibility of use different kind of filter, for example, to partly modify such self-portrait. So the semiotics of selfie is a very fertile field of research. Colleagues of mine are also expert in feeding this semiotics reflection of on the selfies, also because we are studying face. So obviously, this is that's a driver of new understanding of our digital faces. But also, it's worthy mentioning that Professor Leone wrote a brilliant paper about the semiotics of selfies, which really laid the foundation for further research on the selfie. And he defined the selfie as in that article as a glorification of the present. In a moment when Professor Leone stated that we are really suffering kind of loss of significance. So, why selfies are, or how semiotician should study selfie? And we have here a brilliant guideline for that. So, what interests semiotician is neither the setup, and I'm quoting, the psychological motivation that lead to take self. This is not really what interests semiotician, nor the social connotation of selfie communicate. What really interests semiotic is the meaningful and communicative structure of the selfie, its position and role in the diachronic and synchronic development of the semiosphere as a community of interpreters. What we can call, and also obviously Professor Leone anticipate those categories. What is the intensio selfies, by paraphrasing the category established by Umberto Eco in his masterpiece, The Limits of Interpretation. So how to describe such meaningful, what Professor Leone defined as meaningful and communicate structure of the selfie, how to define it. In regarding to tourism practice. So the capillary circulation of selfies in the most popular Western social media, but obviously in Eastern ones too. The capillary circulation of selfie in textuality devoted to tourism or to tourism promotion, or that operate as new channels of tourism promotion, such as social media, for example, is a way that this increasing of selfie is a way of record and share experience, and also a way of accruing social capital. But if we focus on such structure of the selfie, we can say how selfie are not considered just as self-portrait, but rather portray of the self in the act of self-portrait that is slightly different. If we want to refer to tourism selfies, namely the self that we take when we are tourists, when we are traveling, and then the self that we post on our social medias, different social media, is not just a camera extending outward to capture a destination. The camera is now the camera is now pointed at ourselves, and we can say is pointed at the self by the self. Through these processes, tourists are able to ascribe the characteristics they otherwise associate to tourist signs onto themselves, rather than fetishizing the extraordinary. At the tourist destination, tourists seek to capture the extraordinary within themselves by just pointing the camera at their face. So as Professor Leone has already pointed out in that publication, the selfie objectifying the memory of the self. So if we related that to tourism practice, the relationship between the subject and the object of value, namely the subject, the tourist, and the object of value, the place to be visited, such relationship seems to be reversed. One may argue is that face, which is othered, by othering the face, by objectifying the face through the instead of othering the place, which is normally what is told about tourism. I'm othering the place. I'm searching the other in the place I visit. Okay, so by othering the self, the relationship between tourist and destination, the subject and the object, take a very different dimension. Rather than using tourist photography as a way to extend the tourist gaze outwards, the tourist gaze and tourist representation are now through the selfie, through this centrality of the digital face is taken by himself or herself, is now reflecting back as a tourist, has also a central player in a tourism destination. So has the tourist destination become just we can say a distant backdrop, or even completely disappear from tourist representation, whereas the face is central now and is elevated, of course, as a tourist product. Okay, so just some. I'm not really aware about what time is it. Okay, it's already 11. I don't know if we want to take a break, or I think I will just have some 8 minutes left.
I think it's good if we continue until the end of this wonderful presentation, okay. and then we take a break, and in the following part we take questions and we.
Okay, good.
Okay, thank you very much. So go on.
Really, now I will have just a very, very short sum up, and then I will jump to conclusion. So I think that is already done. Okay. So well, just a short sum up before conclusion. Well, in my talk, I mentioned how space has been treated and is studied by semiotics as a task, in particularly the interest among semiotics community towards urban space and obviously towards tourism spaces. A text, we don't have to forget about that, is something, is a structure which has borders, which are subjects to process, which are interested by process of resemantization, of transformation. Okay, they are not given once and they stick like that. They are always changing. So a city or a tourist place, a changing text, which is subject to different processes of rewriting. Okay, so we saw how the advent of new technology and the multiplication of images and discourses on the place through new media and social media create an effect of multiplication of gazes, and that we also affirm that, we also state that tourism representation are no longer, we can say they are no longer just produced by DMO, which are the responsible for tourism marketing, but those representations are more distributed into the variety of players who contribute to the tourism representation, and of course, which become the producer or the co-producer or the prosumer, if you want, of plays imaginaries. So arguably, in semiotics terms, such a shift operates at a level of the instance of the destination, in semiotics terms, not in touristic terms, which is, we know, the instance which prompts the subject to his or her object of desire. Okay, this is like the ones that send the subject to go for a mission in the world within the narrative structure. Okay, so in the new tourism digital discourse, the manipulation, which is the action of this destination instance in semiotic terms, the manipulation for inviting tourists to visit places, to visit a given destination, is also run by the same tourists, and no longer, at least in the effect of meaning that we can see in tourism representation, is no longer by the same tourism authority. Here we have just an easy example by a contest promoted by the Thai authority, the Thai tourism channels, which invite the tourists to take control of which is the promotion of the country by taking selfies in all over Thailand, and in this way to create themselves the image, the identity of the place. Of course, this destination structure exists, but the effect of meaning tend to occult, to conceal it. Ultimately, this consideration, this effect of meaning, is the expected effect of meaning in such process, in such operation of destination instance occultation, is an effect of immediacy, right? Supposedly there is no filter, there is no intermediary. Well, there are like portrait filter, but no, there is no intermediary between destinations and tourists. Therefore, the immediacy become a signifier of place authenticity, whereas the tourists become the guardians of the verticality of tourism discourses, are the ones that are responsible for saying this is true or this is not true in terms of representation. This is authentic, this is not authentic. Because they are in such representation, and I'm always talking about effects of meaning, right? We're not really interested in the very intention of the tourist, but we are interested in the effect of meaning of tourism produced by tourism representation. So an effect of meaning of immediacy in having the authenticity has a very core value of the new tourism discourse. So just a promise, a closing note with I like to share with all of you. At least before the pandemic, okay, and especially in Western countries, massive tourism industry has been profoundly questioned by movements that auto-define themselves as anti-tourist movement. Also, media refer to them as to a process of tourist phobia, the fear of the tourist, by pointing out the tourist as responsible for phenomena such as commodification or gentrification of the place, which lead to citizens' expulsion from the city, because cities become much more expensive because of the tourists, and citizens are obliged to move. Okay, so there are processes that interest a lot, especially Western city, as I know, of course. So there is just an images from some tourist phobia manifestation in the city of Barcelona, the city where also I've been living and working, and also an anti-tourism march in Venice. That is another cities in Europe that is really interested by a massive tourism flow, by massive tourism flows, and obviously there is a reaction against that. Okay, so this is something that, of course, happened before, at least before the pandemic. So as I was saying, we were living in a moment when tourism practice has been profoundly questioned. Okay. Here you can see some example. So of course, that image displays a change within what we said before. We can say that such images display a change in the direction of the gaze between the tourist and the destination. Okay, tourists are no longer the ones who look at the destination. Instead, they become object of the destination or of the residents' gaze, who reflect back to them. Such a shift in the gaze direction has been some way anticipated by the massive presence of the tourist selfies in tourism representation, and consequently by the face of the tourists the massive presence of the face of the tourists in contemporary tourism representation, the faces of the tourists as object of someone else's gaze, by really reversing the direction of the gaze from the tourist to the place, again, to ranging from the tourist to the place to up to the place to the tourist. In this such last example, it also in a very kind of angry way, such an angry gaze towards the tourists. A selfie which look back at the same phase of the tourist by objectifying it, by ordering it, if you want. So I just end up with an invitation. Just when, it's very how to say it's very weird in some sense to compare those images of protests against tourists with the latest images about our tourist places completely empty. So it's something that's really catch our attention. Okay, so just when our tourist destination that used to be massive once in this very moment when our tourist destination due to the pandemic are emptied. It's a moment, I think that is a very moment for laying the base for probably a new semiotics of tourism, for a new semiotics of place, which should be able to grasp all the practice, all the tourism practice complexity, maybe, and is what we're trying to do within our splendid Facets research progress, maybe starting from the face of the tourist behind a sanitary mask, which is such a frequent representation those days. Okay, thank you a lot for your patient attention. I think it's very time for taking a break, mostly for you that you have kindly listened to me for more than an hour, I think, or yes. So yeah, and then probably we'll go with all your questions.
Thank you very much, Professor SORO. It was a pleasure listening to you on such a very important topic. It was a very clear lecture, both from the theoretical point of view and in its applications. So you're clearly an expert in the field. We are all very thankful. All the students are thanking you in the chat. We'll take a break until 11:15 Central European Time. And it would be 5:15 in Beijing time. So in 10 minutes time, we'll resume our talk.
Okay. See you in a while.
So this is the time to manifest themselves if they want. But in the meantime, in order to break the ice, well, first of all, congratulations. That was really insightful. I wonder whether you already thought about comparing what is happening right now to tourism and the tourism industry to what happened to it after September 11. So what are the differences? What are the similarities? Is this worse? Is this better? Is this different? So tourism adapted to the presence of terrorism worldwide. Will it adapt also to the presence of the coronavirus worldwide?
Thanks, Massimo. That's a very I'm honored to be addressed with the question. Probably I won't give you a very complete answer because there are lots of factors that I'm not really aware going on. Obviously at a very phenomenological level. If you like it, we could experience kind of a similar experience in those places that are touristic by definition, or that are devoted to transit of tourism, such as the airport. This feeling of being in some way insecure. So, well, I also have to say that by then I obviously traveled little because I was much younger and not such a traveler. But obviously, when we had a series of attacks in Europe, you can really feel a sensation that something has changed in places that has been considered such a neutral places. The concept of no places, such as are defined by the anthropologist Mark Puget, such as the airport, as an example of very neutral and anonymous place. Well, in that moment, those places became very meaningful, because there were places, in those places things might happen. Well, because especially those places were especially considered as a target of potential attacks. Same for tourist places. So now, obviously, the virus entail such a complexity of factor. So the topic of proximity that is now so at stake, that is now so questioned, is a very characteristic of so mostly the massive tourism phenomena. So we are already used with an image of a mass of tourists that stay in a very proximity relation to each other in a tourism spot. So those images have been affected both by the perception of danger provoked by the terrorist attack and to the sensation of insecurity by the presence of the tourist itself in the current scenario. Okay, so at a very individual level, we can say that, for example, the proximity is something that we really now have to question, and tourism is a phenomenon that is very based on the proximity one to another. Also, we have to consider all the new rules at the level of the level more government and legal level. After the 11 September, we experienced a new way of living the places interested by tourism, such as the airport, with a new series of rules. The same we are now experiences with the virus. So there was like a radically change. Probably we can go back to a pre 111 scenario in terms of the way of we experience the place of tourism, and the same from the virus. So the results of these probably we will be able to see it in probably in the next times. Obviously, another similarity that we can have is about the change on destination. There is a big push by tourism authority these days in order to foster a new way and a new form of tourism, such as rural tourism instead of urban tourism. Same as was in that moment wasn't fostered by the authority. It was more a natural way of tourists to go to places that aren't tourists. So has another similarity is that the tendency to what I already mentioned, to give value to places that weren't considered as touristic before. Okay, because we need to escape from the crowd, as we needed to do, as we did after in the aftermath of the attack that targets the West in that moment. So obviously the comparison is very useful dispositive for figuring which will be the new way of doing tourism today, and also, of course, the new representation of tourism. And obviously, they were like also experts in security, talk a lot about such similarity. And now we can say that also we have new technology that in that moment in some way either failed or they weren't so developed, such as the facial recognition that's obviously can help to detect as in the attack scenario, would help to detect the face of the terrorists. Nowadays might detect the face of the virus holder by creating such a controversial discourse in the surveillance system, and also with lots of topic related to privacy and so on.
Hey, thank you very much. That was a really thoughtful answer. Of course, there will be so many other questions to ask you, because it's a fascinating topic. You're probably also writing about it now for your own research. So in a way, we are trying to probably move away from other people, and this was done also in a previous era of tourism, especially when tourism was sold as an elitist activity, as an activity for the elite. So the elite would go to remote places in order not to come across other people. But of course, this is not a model that is easy to sell to a mass of people. And so there is this problem that you cannot sell elite tourism to everyone because it's going to be extremely expensive. But also there is this relation subject-object. In a way, the mass was also part of the show. There are so many touristy events, in particular in Spain. If you think about San Fermin, if you think about the festivals in Bilbao and other cities of Spain, where actually even the elite, think about Hemingway, would go, even tourists with plenty of resources from other cities or countries, would go to see the crowd, because the crowd was somehow also the manifestation, the relic of another epoch, processions, the Semana Santa, San Fermin, and so on and so forth. So in a few days, there's going to be, for instance, there should be these traditional festivals in the Basque Country in Bayonne, but for the first time, they were actually cancelled.
Yeah.
So are we doomed not to see these kind of is this a kind of show or part of the touristy offer that is going to disappear, according to you? Or
Well, it's a curious comment, because just yesterday I was watching the news, and now in Spain, as another European country, we're facing a new outbreaks of the virus, unfortunately, and there is this strong discourse against who has the responsibility of spreading the virus again. And the main target, which is under the media reflector, are young people, like the youth, as the responsible for spreading all over the virus, because of a big gathering of people, either related to official events or just improvised by them. So I would think that this attention to the problem provoked, or the consequences provoked by the gathering of people, and especially by events that are, targeting mostly, but obviously not only young people, is very will be very questioning in the future. And I'm really looking forward, in a way, to looking at how these, as your comment suggests, could really changes the way in which people gather in the future, both under an umbrella of an official event and, as I said, in a more improvising and spontaneous way. So if probably in the next weeks timeline, this discourse against the gathering of young people will be like really accepted overall, and also kind of demonstrate by scientific evidences of that, probably we could phase to a new era for the events, and also for those events that are so how to say grounded in this case Spain tradition. And I'm particularly curious to observe this phenomenon here in Spain, where I'm in this moment, because really, even if nowadays, especially the youth and young people are those ones that are most pointed out as the responsible for spreading the virus, events in Spain are very intergenerational. The participants or the audience is very intergenerational. Okay, so for example, you mentioned the San Fermin manifestation, which is basically a a ride of the bulls in the city of Pamplona in Navarra country, that is very close to Basque. Well, it's the Basquian speaking language country. Okay, it's a very famous manifestation and an event in Spain tradition. So this year, San Fermin was banned, but young people organize a no San Fermin parties, and afterwards media told that the virus there was another outbreak of the virus generated by this. Also, another fact of this news of this day, that in Barcelona, that is a city that were very known for events, actually is considered such as an eventful city. If we look at population and the number of events, that is like massive. Okay, so in Barcelona, of course, the big massive events such as music festival, they were cancelled already, but there was like a tiniest event run by Barcelona municipality that is devoted to theater performances and is much tinier. Also, this one, after the last outbreak of the virus in the city was cancelled, and this create a big reaction in the cultural war, in order to because people of culture, people employing culture, really say they were not responsible for the spreading of the virus, so giving an idea of is not the event is secure. What is not secure is just like spontaneous gathering of people. So there is this, and this is something that will connotate event discourse and event practice in the very near future. So yeah, it's a very interested also field for research, and we have the opportunity, unfortunately, to witness it. And yes.
Well, thank you very much for this very thorough and insightful answer. Indeed, this will be probably a problem and an occasion for reconsideration and food for thought in many other countries too, including China, where Chinese Carnival, for instance, or Chinese New Year are events attracting crowds of people. So we will see how societies will adapt to this new situation. But it's going to be interesting and useful to have a theoretical framework that is ready, powerful, and developed enough in order to somehow interpret and in some cases also foresee these events. So I guess our students are having some troubles with the central network system of the university, so they cannot actually get into the chat. But in any case, it has been a real privilege having you with us, Professor Elsa SORO. Anyway, the students were able to hear you, and the video. Video. Yeah, no problem. No, it's just that they cannot enter the chat. And the video was also recorded for future benefit of other students who weren't able to participate. So let me thank you once again for this wonderful lecture, and I look forward to continuing the conversation with you about this topic in the frame of our activities in Facets, at the University of Turin, at the University of Barcelona, Austria, and in other scientific gatherings, hopefully in Shanghai and China very soon too. So thank you very much, Professor SORO, and see you soon, hopefully in China again.
Real world and China too. Thank you a lot, Massimo, and thank you for our kind student. If you have some suggestion or comments, you can write me an email. You can find me at Facets website, so I will be more than happy to reply to your comments or suggestions by email. So thank you for your attention.
Definitely. There is also a WeChat chat for the course, so we're going to gathering also additional questions from the chat, and I'm going to be very happy to forward them to you. Okay, thank you very much, Professor SORO.
Thank you, Massimo,
all the best.
for the invitation. All the best.
So after this very, very good day, we were really blessed with having this wonderful lecture, and it is also the conclusion of this course, introductory course in general semiotics. Of course, we had very little time. We couldn't expound very much on all the topics of semiotics, which is a very broad discipline, all-encompassing. But we tried to focus on one theme in particular, on the face, and thanks to the fantastic participation of other researchers, and especially from members of my research team, we tried to give an idea, at least a survey, an overview of what the possible applications of semiotics are. So it is time for me to thank you very much. It has been such a privilege, such a pleasure to be with you all, dear students and colleagues of Shanghai University. Now I will be very pleased to receive your feedback, your questions. Of course, I'll always be there in the WeChat group to interact with you. And I'm eager also to receive your short papers, those which you're gonna be writing during the weekend. I just ask for you to write 5 pages, no more, but to concentrate on the topics that were discussed during the course: general semiotics, the basis of the discipline of signification, and in particular the face as an object that has been at the center of many lectures. So in the meantime, let me thank you once again for your wonderful attention and wonderful participation. And if you have any final comments or final questions, of course, very pleased to receive them. Otherwise, I'm always at your disposal, at the disposal of all the friends, colleagues, and students of Shanghai University. I'm really happy because we are living difficult times because of the pandemic, but thanks to the efforts of a University of Shanghai University, and the efforts of my wonderful colleague, Professor Zhenjun, and in particular also the organizational effort of Xuan Xiao, whom I thank very much. We were able to meet virtually and to carry on this activity. Hopefully next year, next summer, I'll be there with you in person. But in any case, we'll find a way to communicate, to exchange our ideas. That's the beautiful part of human beings. They're ready, eager, willing, and capable of adapting even in the most difficult circumstances. So thank you once again, 谢谢, and see you soon, inshallah, with the prosecution of with the continuation of your studies and activity. All the best from France, from Europe, and have a very good evening. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.